I want to be clear about something up front. I didn't set out to prove anything to anyone. I'm not that kind of person, or at least I didn't used to think I was. But when someone spends 3 years slowly convincing you that you're incapable of functioning on your own, and then has the audacity to say it out loud on their way out the door, something shifts inside you. Something quiet and cold and completely determined. His name was Derek. Derek Calloway, 31 years old, software consultant, the kind of guy who remembered every favor he ever did for you and forgot every time he made you cry. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party in Austin, back when I was 25 and thought confidence in a man was the same thing as competence. He was tall, well-dressed, funny in that sharp, slightly cutting way that feels exciting before you realize it's actually just mean. He bought me a drink, made me laugh 3 times in the first 10 minutes, and I was done for. We moved in together after 8 months, which in hindsight was way too fast. But I was working a job I hated, my lease was up, and Derek had this gorgeous 2-bedroom apartment in South Congress with exposed brick and a balcony, and I thought, sure, this is the next chapter. This is what people do. What people also do, apparently, is slowly let someone rewrite the story of who they are. It didn't happen all at once. It never does, right? It was small things at first. He'd make a comment about how I loaded the dishwasher wrong. Then about how I was bad at parallel parking, which, okay, fair. Then about how I wasn't great with money, which had a seed of truth in it. I'd had some credit card debt in my early 20s, and I'd talked about it openly because I trusted him. But he took that one small thing and expanded it into a whole narrative. Mara is bad with money. Mara doesn't understand practical things. Mara is creative and sweet, but she needs someone to keep her grounded. That someone, of course, was him. My name is Mara, by the way. Mara Hendricks, 28 at the time all of this started falling apart. I'm a graphic designer. I do freelance work and also have a part-time contract with a small marketing agency here in Austin. I make decent money. Not Derek money, but real, honest, grown woman money. I have a savings account. I have a Roth IRA that my dad helped me open when I was 23. I am not, in any meaningful sense, an incompetent person. But after 2 years of living with Derek, I had started to feel like one. He handled all the bills because he said I'd forget or mess something up. He booked all our travel because I'd definitely overpay. He talked over me at dinner parties when I started explaining something, filling in words like I'd lose the thread. He'd do it with this affectionate little smile like he was helping. And our friends would laugh, and I'd laugh too. And then I'd lie awake at night feeling hollowed out and not entirely sure why. The thing that finally cracked it open wasn't a big dramatic fight. It was a Tuesday in February. I had gotten a new freelance client. A pretty significant one, actually. A local restaurant group that wanted a full rebrand. I was excited. I came home and I told Derek about it over dinner, and he listened, and then he said, very calmly, "Just make sure you don't undercharge again." Remember the Belmont situation? The Belmont situation was a project from a year earlier where I'd quoted a client a lower rate because they were a nonprofit I believed in. It was my choice. My deliberate, values-based choice. And he had turned it into evidence of my financial incompetence and referenced it approximately 47 times since. I said, "I know how to price my work, Derek," he said. "I'm just saying. I didn't say anything else." I cleared the table. I did the dishes. I went to bed early claiming a headache. And somewhere between lying down and falling asleep, I thought, very clearly, like a door opening in a quiet room, I don't think I like who I am when I'm with him. It took me another 4 months to actually end it. I won't pretend I was brave and decisive from that moment on. I went to therapy, started seeing a woman named Dr. Carla Reyes, who I'd been putting off for over a year, because Derek thought therapy was a little indulgent for someone without any real trauma. Dr. Reyes did not think I was indulgent. Dr. Reyes looked at me in our 3rd session and said, very evenly, "It sounds like you've been outsourcing your sense of self-worth to someone who has a vested interest in keeping it low." I cried for 25 minutes straight. It was the most expensive cry of my life and also absolutely worth it. I told Derek it was over on a Sunday in June. I'd waited until my friend Simone said I could stay with her for a few weeks while I figured out next steps. I sat Derek down in the living room, his living room, technically his name on the lease, and I told him calmly that I didn't think this was working and that I'd be moving my things out over the next couple of weeks. He did not take it well. He went through about 4 different modes in the span of an hour. First, there was the confusion mode, which was almost sweet, where he genuinely seemed baffled that I was doing this. Then there was the negotiation mode, where he listed all the things he did for me, the bills he managed, the trips he planned, the ways he looked after me. Then there was the guilt mode, quieter and more insidious, where he talked about how much he'd invested in this relationship, in me, in my growth. And then there was the fourth mode, the one I still think about. He stood up. He straightened his shirt. And he said, "Mara, I genuinely hope this works out for you. But you should know, you've never actually had to manage your life on your own. Not really. Not the hard parts. I've carried a lot of that. And I worry that without someone like me, you're going to struggle." He said it so calmly, so genuinely, like he was delivering a weather forecast. There's a 70% chance of Mara falling apart. I looked at him for a long moment and I said, "Okay, just okay." And then I went into the bedroom and started making a list of everything I needed to move. I stayed at Simone's for 3 weeks. Simone is my best friend, 30 years old, a nurse practitioner, hilarious and no nonsense, and deeply allergic to self-pity. She fed me a lot of pasta and made me go on walks and refused to let me spiral for more than 30 minutes at a time before redirecting me. She also, crucially, helped me find my apartment. It's a 1-bedroom in East Austin, 2nd floor, with big windows and original hardwood floors and a clawfoot tub that is objectively impractical and completely wonderful. The rent was on the higher end of what I'd budgeted. But I did the math myself, pulled up a spreadsheet, went through my income, my expenses, my projected freelance earnings, everything. And I figured out that I could make it work if I was strategic. I signed the lease on a Friday. I cried a little in the parking lot of the leasing office, but it was the good kind. The kind that feels like relief. Moving in happened over a long weekend in July. Simone came, and also my friend Jade, who has a truck, and my younger brother Kyle, who complained the entire time but carried the heaviest boxes without being asked, because that's just who he is. We got pizza afterward and sat on my floor because I didn't have furniture yet. Just a sleeping bag and some boxes, and it was genuinely one of the nicest evenings I'd had in years. Now, here's where the story turns into something else. Because Derek, to his credit or his detriment, depending on how you look at it, did not entirely disappear. We had some mutual friends, couples we'd socialized with together, and Austin is not a small town, but it's also not New York. There was some overlap. And Derek, who had seemed so self-contained and unbothered when I left, had apparently taken to telling people casually in that calm, reasonable voice of his that he was a little worried about me. That he hoped I'd be okay. That it was a big step. Living alone for the first time. I heard this from our mutual friend Priya, who told me over brunch with the kind of careful face that meant she thought I should know but wasn't sure how I'd take it. I took it very quietly. I sipped my coffee. I said, "That's really kind of him." And I went home and I got to work, not out of anger. Or, okay, maybe a little out of anger, but mostly out of something cleaner. A kind of focused intention. He had handed me a very specific challenge, even if he didn't mean to, and some part of me decided to meet it. The apartment came first. I'd moved in with almost nothing. I'd taken my clothes, my equipment, my art books, and a few things I'd bought myself during our relationship. Derek had bought most of the furniture, and I hadn't wanted any of it. So I started from scratch, which was terrifying, and also, I came to realize, kind of extraordinary. Every single thing in my apartment was something I chose. Just me. No compromises, no quiet vetoes, no, "Are you sure about that color?" I spent a lot of time on it and not a lot of money, because I was being smart about money, as it turned out. I found a beautiful cream linen sofa on Facebook Marketplace from a woman in Tarrytown who was redecorating. I found a round dining table at an estate sale. I painted the bedroom a deep, dusty terracotta that Derek would have absolutely hated, and that I loved so much it made my chest hurt a little. I put up my own artwork, some framed prints I'd made myself, a large abstract piece from a local artist I'd always admired. I got a big secondhand bookshelf and filled it with every book I'd been quietly adding to my reading list for 3 years without ever quite having the space or the silence to get to them. By September, 2 months after I moved in, the apartment looked like someone lived there. Not someone Derek would have approved of. Someone I recognized. Work was the second thing. The restaurant group rebrand went well. Really well, actually. The clients were enthusiastic and communicative, and they paid on time, which is not always a given in freelance world. And when we wrapped, they referred me to 2 other businesses in their network. I raised my rates, Not recklessly. I did research, looked at industry standards, talked to other freelancers in my network about what they charged, and I raised them by 20%, and not a single client left. My contract with the marketing agency also expanded in the fall. One of their senior designers went on extended leave, and they asked if I wanted to take on more hours. I said yes. It meant a busier season, but it also meant a more comfortable cushion, and I'd pay off the last of my credit card debt in October and sit with that for a minute, that quiet, clean feeling of not owing anyone anything. I was also, somewhere in the middle of all this, learning how to be alone. Really alone. Not the kind of alone where you're waiting for someone to come home, but the kind where Friday night is yours to do whatever you want with, and you actually have to figure out what that is. At first, it was uncomfortable. I'd make dinner and eat it standing at the kitchen counter because sitting at the table by myself felt strange. I'd turn on the TV not because I wanted to watch anything, but because I needed the noise. I'd scroll through my phone for 20 minutes before bed looking for what? I didn't know, but slowly it became something else. I started cooking things that took time. Slow braises, homemade pasta, the kind of cooking that Derek had always found pointless when you could just order in. I started going to a yoga class on Sunday mornings that I loved. I started reading again, really reading, curled up in the corner of my sofa with a cup of tea, no one asking me anything. I started taking myself to things, a gallery opening, a live music show, a food festival downtown, sometimes with friends and sometimes alone, which I'd been terrified of and which turned out to be, a lot of the time, wonderful. I also, around November, went on a date. His name was Ryan, 32, high school history teacher, originally from Ohio. We matched on Hinge and talked for about a week before meeting for coffee, and the coffee turned into a walk around the neighborhood, and the walk turned into grabbing a beer at a bar nearby, and before I knew it, 3 hours had passed. He was thoughtful and a little goofy, and he asked me questions about my work and actually listened to the answers. When I told him about the restaurant rebrand and the logo work I'd done, he said, "Can I see it?" And when I pulled it up on my phone, he looked at it carefully and said, "That's genuinely really good." Not like he was flattering me. Like he was making an observation. It wasn't serious yet or anything. We were figuring it out. But it felt different from anything I'd felt in a long time. It felt like equal footing. Now the part I promised you. The part with Derek watching. In December, about 6 months after I moved out, there was a holiday party. One of our mutual friends, a guy named Owen, threw it every year. Big sprawling thing at his house in Hyde Park. Everyone invited. Very casual, come if you can energy. I almost didn't go. Simone told me I should. She said, and I'm quoting directly, "You are not going to spend December hiding from a man who told you that you couldn't parallel park." So I went. I wore a dark green dress I'd bought for myself in October, the kind I'd always wanted, but Derek had once called a little much. I'd gotten my hair done the week before. I felt objectively very good walking up to Owen's front door. I'm not saying this to be vain. I'm saying it because 6 months earlier, I'd been eating dinner at a kitchen counter alone because I didn't know how to sit with myself. And now I walked into that party and felt like a person who belonged in a room. Derek was there. I spotted him about 10 minutes in, talking to a small group near the kitchen. He saw me at the same time. There was a moment where we both sort of registered the other one, and then we both kept moving. Which felt fine, which felt like adults. But here's what happened over the course of that evening. And I'm telling it the way it unfolded, because the sequence matters. First, Owen pulled me aside almost immediately and said the design work I'd done for his sister's small business earlier that year, a little logo project, nothing major, had apparently led her to double her online sales. He hugged me and said I was crazy talented and made me feel immediately at home. Then I ran into Priya and her husband, and Priya asked how the apartment was, and I showed her pictures on my phone. The terracotta bedroom, the clawfoot tub, the sofa from Tarrytown, and she grabbed my arm and said, "Mara, this is stunning. You have such an incredible eye." Then Ryan showed up, because I'd casually mentioned the party to him and he knew Owen vaguely through a friend of a friend, and he'd been invited anyway, which is the kind of coincidence that either means something or means nothing. He came in looking nice, a little nervous, and when he found me, he visibly relaxed in a way that made something warm happen in my chest. I introduced him to Simone, who gave me an extremely subtle thumbs up behind his back, and Derek watched all of this. Not in a creepy way, not hovering. We're talking about a party with 40 people. Nobody was staring at anyone. But I was aware of him in the room the way you're always aware of someone you were once very close to. And more than once I caught him looking. Looking at the pictures of my apartment on Priya's phone. Looking at Ryan, who had his hand on the small of my back while we talked to a group near the fireplace. Looking at me laughing at something Owen said, at me animated and talking about work, at me in the green dress that was not, as it turned out, too much. He didn't approach me until about an hour before I left. By that point, things had gotten loud and warm and comfortable the way good parties do, and he kind of materialized beside me when I was alone for a second refilling my drink. He said, "Hey, you look great." I said, "Thanks." "You too," he said. "How are you? How's everything going?" And I said, honestly and without drama, really well, actually. "Great even," he nodded. He looked like he was choosing words carefully. He said, "The apartment looks nice." Priya showed me some pictures. I said, "I love it." He said, "And work?" I said, "Work is good. Really good. I raised my rates, got some new clients, expanded my contract with the agency. It's been a solid year." There was a pause. And Derek said quietly, "I'm glad. I'm glad it worked out." He said it with something in his voice that I couldn't quite name and didn't feel the need to examine. I just said, "Thank you," and then someone called my name from across the room and I went. And that was the last conversation we had that night. I left the party around 10 with Simone and Ryan, the three of us walking to our cars in the cold December air, and Simone made Ryan do an impression of one of his students that had her crying laughing, and I stood there in the parking lot of Owen's house on a clear night in Austin thinking about something Dr. Reyes had said to me a few months earlier. She'd said, "You don't need to perform your recovery for anyone, but there's nothing wrong with letting yourself be seen." I think about that a lot. I'm not writing this to gloat, or not entirely. Derek is not a villain. He's a man who needed to feel essential and found someone accommodating enough to let him be, and that dynamic is on both of us. I learned things I needed to learn. About what I tolerate. About the quiet voice that knew something was wrong long before I listened to it. About what it means to actually build something rather than just occupy the space someone else designed. What I know is this. 6 months after a man told me, calmly and sincerely, that he worried I wouldn't be able to manage without him. I stood in my terracotta bedroom on a Sunday morning, coffee in one hand, reading a book I chose, in an apartment I furnished, having signed a lease I negotiated, after a Saturday night out in a dress I picked, next to a person who looked at my work and said it was genuinely really good. He got to watch it happen. I didn't plan it that way, but I didn't mind.